Hi everyone. In today's episode of Why People Buy, we are thrilled to have with us Harshit Agrawal, who is an internationally acclaimed AI artist and the first in India to host an AI exhibition, a solo AI exhibition. He's an alum of the coveted MIT Media Labs, and he's completely shaken up the art world by fusing AI, fusing cutting edge tech and NFT. So we're super excited to have you with us today, Harshit. And we'll delve with you deep into why people buy AI art, right? What goes in behind people's thought process in investing in NFTs, and also a little bit about how you are shaping the future of digital art ownership. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Harshit. And of course, Harshit is also a very close friend, and I have seen Harshit's journey, and I'm super proud of it, and really excited to have you chat with me today, Harshit. Welcome.
Thank you, Aditi. Thank you so much for having me. Super excited when, like you mentioned, that you're thinking of doing something like this, and I think it's a really exciting series, and I'd love to dive deeper into all the other people that you have on board, etc. But really excited to speak with you on this topic. I think it's a very underexplored topic in a certain sense, and there are quite a few unexpected nuances I feel about this space, so excited to delve into some of those. Yeah.
Absolutely, Harshit. I think before delving into the why, it'll be very interesting for me to also understand what is AI art, right?
Mm.
You've got collectors internationally that you've sold your pieces to, so would love to understand the process behind how you create. Sorry, Harshit, can you hear me? There was a bit of a snack. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can give you.
Okay, all right. So I was saying we would love to understand first what exactly is AI art. So when you went into this journey of becoming an AI artist, what was the process you followed? Tell us a little bit more about what is AI art.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. The idea of making art with tech and particularly with AI is a somewhat new, but it's also the interesting fact of this is that technology and art have always kind of been correlated, right? And in certain sense, like art is a practice of kind of talking about and commenting on whatever the contemporary reality of a time is. And our contemporary reality is very much like rooted in artificial intelligence, machine learning, and just how like these systems are shaping our collective reality, right? And therefore, like it becomes almost the responsibility of artists to use AI either as a medium or a material or just as some kind of an object that they want to build narratives around. And I think that's what, like, for me, particularly, AI art is all about. It's about understanding how a technology like AI is shaping up everyone's kind of everyday reality. And it's also like not at an individual level only, but also at a collective level, just how like very like impactful systems like the politics of a country, the economics of the world, etc. How people get influenced, how they make decisions, what kind of cultural things they consume, what kind of political decisions they make. All of that has an underlying layer of understanding people's kind of psyche through data points that are collected digitally and then serving them like certain content, certain certain things that are all kind of rooted in this channel of using AI to do that. So it becomes really important to then use AI almost as sort of the basis of building themes or narratives around for artists. So I think that that's for me what AI art is. But I will kind of give another picture of it, which has become sort of the more, I think, reductive sense of how people talk about AI art, which is that you have these generative AI algorithms and where you can write a prompt and generate an image. And oftentimes, people reduce AI art to that, which think becomes very problematic because it's like saying that if everyone has a phone which has a camera, everyone can take photographs, but that doesn't make everyone a lens based artist or a photographer in the sense of an artist, right? So I think the idea of democratizing the act of image making with prompts and generative AI is great, and it means that everyone can kind of make something. But the idea of does it have artistic relevance or artistic value really depends on the kind of thinking or the kind of emotional process that an artist might go through in dealing with AI as a subject. So I think that is, for me at least, the distinction of what makes a work of art about AI or using AI compared to sort of the more generalized and reductive notion that's out there today.
Got it. I think basically what you said is super critical, that there is also the artistic value that goes in. It's not a great example that you gave was that we all have camera phones. Doesn't make all of us photographers, right?
Yeah.
Even if many of us would like to think so, but that doesn't work that way. And I'm sure that's how the collector community also looks at it, right? So then delving into why they buy, right? Why collectors buy AI art, help us understand the thought process, right? What goes behind from an emotions or an intellect standpoint, right?
Yes.
Are most of these collectors just excited about owning a futuristic piece of art, or do they actually see a different kind of artistic value, right? In because these pieces of art, it's no joke, it goes for lakhs and crores of rupees, right? So which means there is a value that they see behind it. Help us understand why they go about buying AI art.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a few different like ways to look at this. Definitely, I think we're in a certain sense with the uh, popularization of machine learning AI, and I think there is slightly more awareness in terms of a general audience also understanding this and trying to like kind of get into it. But also like there is, I think, that moment currently, especially in the arts, right? Like I think a big moment like this probably happened when photography was introduced back in the 1800s, when like the first camera sort of started becoming functional and people started seeing usage of that. Art till then kind of had a responsibility, or the skill of an artist was kind of to mimic reality as best as possible. So to like make a king's portrait or whatever to an exactness, right? And when cameras could do that instantly, artists had to evolve. Artists had to change what meant as an art form for them. So they, in some sense, you could have said that artists were threatened by the coming of photography, but in a certain other sense, you know that art continued to thrive. And in fact, in a certain sense, artists got liberated from that process of just mimicking reality to having more of a creative ability to reinterpret reality. So you had all these like abstract portraits, etc., that came out, and all kinds of art movements that emerged, right? And in a certain sense, we are in that phase today with, I would say, with AI coming in, and in a certain sense, saying that the idea of image making, or the idea of just that kind of that you have an idea and you make an image of that, may be to some extent like photography just capturing reality. Like it's a parallel to that. So the idea of just image making might no longer be that novel. So, with the use of AI in itself, like the process in itself, which is the idea that you can, take in large amounts of data, and now for the first time, you have an entity that can actually process that data for you and make like interesting visuals through that. Like how an artist uses that entire gamut of what an AI technology offers, that becomes kind of that new kind of art that can suddenly become possible, and which is something that is a long enough process where an artist's creative craft can actually like thrive. So it's not just like writing a prompt and getting an image out, which reduces the kind of scope for craftsmanship to come through, right? But if it's more about like collecting data, training algorithms, kind of producing something through that. Then there is a longer kind of process where through the process, like an artist can express their craft also. So in a sense, what I'm saying is that there is a new kind of art that is potentially emerging, and that is always exciting for a collector, right? To become one of the first like people in the world pretty much to get an understanding of that and to get hooked to the idea of that I have the first few pieces which were made with the idea of like AI not just as a means to an end, but AI as a material in itself and sort of the artist crafting something through that. So I think, yeah, that kind of new form of art itself becomes an exciting aspect for a collector. There's also obviously like we were discussing the relevance of the contemporary reality that AI has, and collectors kind of responding to that. But also there is interestingly like a new I would say category of collectors that's also emerging, right? Like people who are more coming from a background of technology, and not necessarily from a artistic or a purely kind of creative background.
So they may
But
not have collected art before
they're not collected. They
traditional
are
art, but
probably
they're
like,
very excited
yeah,
about AI art.
yeah, because they resonate with what's happening. They can kind of get that intellectual kick also, that I know like I can deconstruct in a certain way with the artist, like the process that they might have followed, and they probably have more appreciation for the craft of like actually making an AI artwork, because they know that kind of the nitty gritties of training your model and like collecting data, etc., etc. So I think that kind of is another category of collectors that's emerging. There's also, and maybe we discuss this in more detail as we continue speaking, but the idea of also combining this idea of people who are more tech savvy in a certain way, but also like, digital currencies, etc., that are into play these days. And you have mostly the section who's more tech savvy, have more understanding and ownership of like those kind of like monetary material to buy stuff with, right? And that aspect has also trickled down into, now that we have AI art, which is digital in nature by default, like you have obviously questions around that, around how can you ensure that it's unique, etc., and how people have found like technical solutions for that. So I think that whole like population kind of gets activated in terms of becoming a new audience for art. But at the same time, traditional sort of collectors are also responding to this one, as I said, kind of the new kind of art that they're seeing through it. But also, yeah, just the relevance and not kind of wanting to be left out, right? Like they've built sort of empires collecting art, and they've built like huge sort of historically relevant kind of like timeline progression of artist collections. So they want to kind of make sure that they get into this loop of collecting digitally native AI based art.
There's also probably always hype which gets created whenever something very new, cool, exciting happens. But then what I understand from our conversation here is that there probably was a hype, but then there's also a lot of meat behind it, right? For example, with the whole blockchain going up and down, there'll always be critics who'll come and say, "Oh, this is NFTs are all just a hype." But then I think for a serious AI artist like you, and for serious AI collectors, right? For example, NFTs have played a very important role. Of course, the hype behind it could sometimes make it look like it's a lot of fluff, but it's not, basically, right? It's really paving the way into something very new. And the other very interesting thing that I took away from what you mentioned is that for an artist like you, or even for collectors, AI is a tool. Just like when you had cameras, cameras were a tool for artists, creative people to be able to express themselves. So AI is a tool. which sort of self answers the the question I had, the next question I had, which is who is the artist here, right? The machine versus the man. But then when you go about using this tool, which also has a bit of a mind of its own, right? Um, do you have scenarios where there's like a creative epiphany that the machine has? Walk me through a little bit about how that process is for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's very right to say that yeah, AI is like a tool, and it should be looked as that, and not necessarily kind of uh, raised beyond that kind of category and say that it is a creative autonomy in its own right and so on. I think there is a certain marketing, there is a certain kind of storytelling that gets pushed beyond certain like real scenarios in that sense, and there is always that kind of mindset that AI is going to take over everything, including the arts, and arts were supposed to be like sort of the cornerstone of human imagination and human like intellect and so on. So now what do we have to do? But I think like it's important to again like think a bit more about this. This is definitely a tool which is much more powerful than probably all the other tools that we've had. It, like you said, it has I wouldn't go to the extent of saying a mind of its own, but it has this kind of capability which no other tool has had, which is to be able to process large, like huge amounts of volumes of data, right? And that results in kind of emergent behavior or emergent like answers that the AI produces, which humans might not have thought of. Like it's a pattern making machine at on steroids, basically, and there are patterns that it makes that humans wouldn't have arrived at naturally. So it does give it that kind of eerie quality a certain number of times, and the idea is to kind of embrace that eerie quality, at least for me in the artistic process, to kind of in a certain sense submit yourself during the art making process to that ability to be surprised, but not like over like like over worship it to say that it's become something that is completely out of my control, or it's become something that's going to like take my job away or something, right? Or
So
like keep
you
it
are
at a
always in
pedestal.
control, basically, if I understand correctly. The artist is in control, but you keep an element of creativity that you expect from the machine. Is that a good way to look at it?
The artist is in control, and there is an element of surprise that the artist, if they're wanting to get that from the machine, they can, and kind of embrace that actually, and make sure that they allow that space to be created where the machine is giving responses or creating stuff from their creative input that allows them to kind of move their direction of creation in a certain way. So I think what I'm trying to say is that the artist kind of decides what exactly is happening, but they create a space for the machine to kind of answer back in a certain way and see if that creates a certain change in the way they were thinking, and kind of rebuild or redirect their process to accommodate for that new direction that the machine might have offered. And what I feel is very interesting is this is the reality of not just an artistic process, but for anything that anyone is doing today, right? Like you go to Amazon to buy something, there are 10 recommendations that you have based on such a large like collective understanding of your own buying history, your own like likes, etc., but also what's trending, all of like there is a big fusion of data and algorithms that have understood a certain thing and given you those 10 very like targeted recommendations, right?
Yeah.
And your buying decision does get influenced, so you are in control, so to say. You went in with a certain thought that I want that to me back or whatever, and through that process of buying itself you get influenced by what the machine is showing you. And that is the reality of how we are making decisions day in, day out, right? From buying bags to like who we vote, right? It's like we see 10 Instagram reels that are directly targeted for you for your news feed, right? Based on like the kind of data points that you've left in your digital trace, and your decision of who to vote for gets changed by that, right? So even in an artistic process, it's pretty much the same. It's about embracing that reality that I am no more that sort of uh, center of everything, kind of humans at the center of everything narrative, but humans are making the decisions of what to do. The intention comes from the human, the creative intention of this is what I want to express through my work. But you let the machine kind of guide you in a certain way also during the process to say how best to express that intention, right?
Yeah.
And if what happens also is like in a few projects, what would happen is I wouldn't even begin with a very clear intention. I would say that this is a theme that I want to like kind of work towards. And I will go through the process of collecting data about that theme and training like certain algorithms to better understand that data itself, because I personally cannot fathom like or process that like large amount of data, right? Even visually, like if I have 50,000 images about, let's say, how people in India represent gender, which was a project that I did with a couple of collaborators. I mean, the idea that we had was okay, we'll collect these drawings by people, and we would have kind of male, female, like generalized male, female representations. But what we realized is when we trained an AI algorithm that there is no clear separation of male, female categories that's emerging from the data. Even though people drew these drawings as separate, like binary representations of gender, collectively, when the machine looks at it, it represents it as a spectrum rather than being able to like classify them very neatly into two classes. So that was something that we didn't expect, but the machine kind of gave us that direction of where this artwork could lead to and what the story of this data set could be, right? So I think that is really interesting in an artistic process to let the machine kind of augment the amount of things that you can do intellectually, which is processing data, etc. But having said that, at the end of the day, the artist makes the decision of whether this story is something that makes sense to them, is something that they feel connected to, is something that they want to put out in the world. And therefore, like the work of art that is created belongs to the artist completely. So there is no creative epiphany from the machine in itself, right? Like there is no, I mean, we'll get into very like very muddy spaces if we start talking of there is no consciousness that the machine comes up with in terms of saying that that this is what I like as the artwork, so this is my artwork. As the human, you decide what you want to do with it. But so there is no intentionality within the machine, and even before the machine sort of started producing like unexpected imagery or something like that. Even before that, in the art realm, especially, like you had this understanding that a beautiful sunset is beautiful, but it's not a work of art because no human claimed it or called it or intended for that sunset to happen in a certain way, right? So there was no human intention, there was no human kind of statement that this is an artwork. Uh, a sunset, if a human captures it in a photograph and says that this is a work of art, becomes a work of art. So that kind of human statement always has to be there, or that humans kind of um, claiming something to be a work of art has to be there for it to become a work of art. Otherwise, it's kind of something interesting, something beautiful, but it stops at that. I think by definition, almost like the role of the human is critical for something to be called a work of art.
Absolutely. And then that value that is created by, the human creativity part of it, right? Um, how do you measure that value? So, for example, just first of all, I think, and as a marketer and as somebody who's done a management degree, the fundamental thing that we are taught is how do you price something, right? Pricing is always a very critical aspect, especially for, things that are not utility, right? Utility is still anything. Actually, pricing depends on demand, supply, and all of different things, but the moment it's not utility, right, how do you price something, right? So help me understand, how does pricing happen for AI art when you are creating a piece of art? How do you know you want to price it as X? I'm sure that some of the art pieces you've made would have, been priced at a much higher than the others. So how did you go about the journey? How does pricing for AI art work?
Yeah, pricing in art generally is a very like complicated topic, and it's there is, I think, no logic kind of there is no set formula or set logic that these are the variables you put in and you get like the price of the artwork out. There are a few things that kind of broadly determine the price. One, because it's such a subjective field, right? There is no sense of objectivity at all. Like, to give a wild example, like Art Basel, Miami, it's an art fest that happens, and it's one of the like better sort of art festivals around the world. And there was recently, like I think 3 4 years ago, an artist who stuck a banana with a duct tape and said that that is their work of art. It was literally like a real banana stuck with a duct tape. But that work sold for $120,000,
Wow.
which is quite crazy, right? And how do you assign value to a banana of that magnitude? And then there were three editions of that. Like, so the artist had the intention that they'll sell basically three bananas in that same way. But then there was a performance artist that came in, he peeled the banana out and ate the banana half and kind of stuck it back, I think. And the value of that half-eaten banana like skyrocketed. It became much more because like, now there was a story behind it. So, in a certain sense, like it's really remarkable how pricing in the art world works. And just to give one more like quick example before we start giving some factors as to what might determine the price. There's an artist, Banksy, who's like a really famous artist who goes around kind of doing street art, etc. And the real identity of the artist is unknown to a large extent. And one of his iconic like artworks, which is a girl holding a balloon, was being auctioned at Sotheby's or Christie's, one of these major auction houses. And during the auction, like it was, I think the work was selling for some $1 million, etc. And during the auction, as the auction, like the hammer hit, the artist had programmed that the art will self shred. So it'll basically start coming out of the frame, and there was a shredder at the bottom of the frame. So the artwork would start getting ripped apart as the auction happens. And immediately the shredded piece of artwork sold for, I think, 15, 16 times the price that it was selling for.
Wow.
Like, so immediately, like the value of the artwork kind of escalated multifold, right? And I think that's in some ways, like these examples were to, in some ways, give a sense of A, that there is really no objectivity in terms of determining the art price. But the idea of a story associated with a piece of artwork is probably a huge determining factor in terms of what becomes the price of the artwork. Like, people collect art primarily for the stories that they feel through the work, right? Either they can kind of say that this is what I felt about the work, this is how I related to the work, or they kind of understand the story of the artist who's built the work and why they made a certain artwork. So I think that kind of narrative becomes really important. There's obviously like aesthetic value value, and there is obviously like kind of value of whether the artist has pushed the boundary in terms of either it could be kind of intellectual boundaries or visual or retinal, as they say, kind of boundaries. So if the artist has created some kind of I mean, in the earlier times the retinal boundary was more prominent, that the artist had created sort of this uh, visual, like you have the Van Gogh paintings, right? Like that kind of spiral impasto artwork, which hadn't been seen till then, or you have more of the intellectual boundaries with the surrealist Dali artworks, where you have the melting clock and so on, and that idea of like creating artworks that talk about time as a concept that melts away, etc. So it really becomes that, is this work of art kind of pushing the idea of what humanity has experienced till then, or is able to kind of get people thinking or get people feeling a certain like new emotion, new kind of reasoning of how the world is functioning or where the world is going, something of that sort, really kind of captures a collector's attention. The other factors obviously become like the artist's career itself. So, has the artist like been consistently producing work? Is the artist's style recognizable? There is a huge value associated with recognizability in the art world, that if I have this work of art, will people like instantly recognize that this is a Harshit Agrawal work or a Subodh Gupta work or whatever, right? So that idea that people kind of connect with, like the artist has built a style in a way that people are able to instantly connect with, and some artists kind of don't treat style as a visual language, but they treat style as kind of a conceptual language, that this particular artist talks about the use of AI in how it's kind of shaping uh, the politics of the world or something. So that becomes kind of the conceptual language of the artist. So for me also, like visual language is probably more secondary than kind of the conceptual like language that I'm building through my body of work, which is about how kind of AI is shaping up the future of kind of socio-political systems in the world. Uh, so I think those are some factors. Then there is obviously like kind of like I said, kind of the track record of the artist. Like if uh, they have a gallery representation, if they've been collected by institutions in the past, meaning like museums or like kind of cultural other cultural bodies in the past, if they've done solo shows, etc. So there are different like factors, I think, that become, and in today's sort of social media age, there's also obviously the factor of how visible is the artist, and not a lot of traditional art collectors kind of rely on that metric, but there are like the new age collectors sort of feeling a sense of connectedness with the artist if the artists themselves have a lot of following, etc. And the artists try to optimize for that. So I think these are some factors that I can say at a very basic level. I would say like the size of the artwork, the production cost itself. Like if you're obviously like buying, let's say, digital work which might require a digital frame, etc. Like the price of that artwork by itself, like just by the raw material associated with presenting that artwork goes up. So the value of the artwork itself kind of rises a bit. So I think these would be some of the factors. But all said and done, at the end of the day, it's a very non-objective, very I think a market driven a lot by at that moment, like what the collector feels in terms of connectedness with the artwork, and if they kind of realize that value of the artwork pushing boundaries in a certain sense, and then to some extent also, like, upon the collector it becomes where they want to place the artwork, like if it's sort of their home or something, like what does it fit kind of the theme, etc. All of that becomes questions that the collector kind of goes through.
Got it.
Yeah.
But then I'm guessing there are different categories of collectors, like you mentioned. But on an average, right? So we talked about a few different factors. We talked about, of course, the creative element of the art. Then there's also the reputation of the artist, and sometimes even the story or the shock value behind. For example, the one example you spoke where the art shreds itself, or even for that matter, the one with the lone banana. I mean, I can't think of anything else other than some sort of a dopamine hit happening, which is similar to what you get in, let's say, Instagram creativity, right, or Reels creativity. There's some sort of a dopamine hit. So, out of these three factors, do you think there is a percentage breakup of which one matters more than the other for an average collector, or do you think it's vastly different depending on the category of collectors?
Yeah, exactly. I think the latter, which is that it really is an individual collector's choice, like what they connect with the most. I mean, for me, being an artist and also like having collected some works primarily in the NFT space. Like for me, the shock value is probably not the most important. Like I wouldn't go and buy an eaten banana or something. But for a lot of collectors, that is really valuable, and it's very appreciative also because I mean they recognize that that kind of the artists. I mean, a lot of times artists also like use this immense subjectivity to make bullshit basically, like to not mince my words, and sometimes it kind of works for them, but oftentimes the artists also have a real like kind of statement that they want to make, like it's probably a statement on the idea of what people consume, etc. Also, right? And to give one example, especially in the artistic sense, like we were talking about how photography changed art world drastically, and then you had all these like movements of abstraction, etc. But then there was one artist, Marcel Duchamp, who basically took up a urinal, a male urinal, and kind of tilted it 90 degrees and kept it as a work of art. And he said that this is my work of art. It's called The Fountain, and it's one of the most iconic like artworks in the history of art because that again like challenged the notion of what art's relevance and what art's responsibility in a certain way. He's like um, that yeah sure, like you can create paintings and you can do all of that, but what if I say that I just find an object and I claim that to be an artwork and I create like kind of a reasoning or a storytelling behind it. Like his whole challenge was basically that just visually good art is not what art is all about. Like that is decoration to a large extent. Art is about something that challenges how you understand the world, what your interpretation of the world is, and how you kind of are able to use art as a channel for critiquing and for kind of pushing a notion to an extreme so that people kind of get that shock, and through that shock it becomes an entry point for them to kind of understand and make more intimate like decisions or more intimate understandings of a certain topic. So his whole deal was that, and he again kind of changed the idea of what art's role in society is to a large extent, saying that the artistic role is not just like you have the, and this is in no ways to like undermine the essence or value of, let's say you have kind of wall paintings at a home or you have kind of rangoli, etc. They have a certain cultural significance, but and they're beautiful, like visually they're really stunning. But are they works of art? Probably not, because they they kind of considered more as decorative elements and elements that kind of visually make a space better, but they don't really push you into like, thinking about something or make you feel a certain sense of uncomfortableness or a certain sense of like yeah, like make you feel something strongly. It need not always be making someone feel uncomfortable, but it could be like just pushing the person to kind of go beyond that first encounter that you have, which is the visual encounter. So in a certain sense, saying that, yeah, like that became like a narrative for art to a large extent, and a lot of collectors started associating with that narrative that this work of art is visually interesting, but what does it do beyond that for me? So, I mean, personally, I would kind of relate with that thinking of a collector. Some collectors just go for pure shock value, which, like we discussed, but maybe the artist does have some kind of story that they want to tell through that, or it's kind of a humorous take on a certain like element of society, etc. So yeah, I mean, artists, collectors kind of might go for that also, but oftentimes, yeah, collectors kind of combine, let's say, the historical kind of track record of an artist. They spend time with an artist to kind of really understand what their thought processes are, how do they, because art is also an investment for them, right? They're looking at an artist to say that this is not just like one work that I want to buy and be done with this. Like I want to really like make sure that you as an artist continue growing, and therefore the work that I've collected continues growing in value. Like
They are
it
investing
comes,
in you as
they're
well as
literally
the
investing in
piece,
it. Yeah,
basically.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So they want to make sure that we've collected some early work of yours, so that like 10 years down the line, when you start like selling to MoMA or something, like we have works of you that can really become priced up, right, at that point of time. So they also want to make sure that that kind of investment is done with an artist that is serious about their craft, serious about their work, and make sure that this artist is going to continue their practice for a few years down the line. So I think, yeah, all these factors come into play, but I would say that like you rightly said, that these sort of different approaches of collection are definitely there. Some collectors are not necessarily looking for kind of return on investment. They're just kind of collecting for the art's sake at that moment. And yeah, whatever kind of makes them feel connected to the work is what they collect for, and then they might not look at kind of the historical record of an artist. Some collectors, like you mentioning also, are very driven by that kind of shock value because they themselves thrive in kind of that narrative. So it becomes a very personal choice of a collector.
So there must be collectors who also do it purely for the business value. Do you see such collectors who it's sort of like a portfolio planning that they do for their their tax planning? Do you see that category also often, or is that less often?
I mean, there is that category for sure. I think it becomes a bit tricky to disassociate yourself completely and kind of just treat it as a financial investment because of the subjectivity involved in art. Because, I mean, it's really tough to kind of predict in a certain sense. I mean, there are a few artists that you can kind of broadly predict that, yeah, these are the artists who made it. So naturally, their work is going to be kind of valuable as a historical artifact also. But otherwise, like if you're especially interested in collecting kind of emerging artists, etc., it becomes really tough to make the right bet. So in a certain sense, it's kind of needed for the collector to also have some personal like
Some
liking or
passion
association
has to be there. It's
with.
kind of like the restaurant business in some way that you should not get into, for
Yeah,
example, creative fields like food or
yeah,
music
yeah,
industry or even filmmaking if you
yeah.
don't have a knack for it because it's not just purely business. There's a
Correct.
lot of creativity and
Correct.
passion.
Exactly. Because
Yeah,
there is very little ways in which you can, yeah, uh, make sure that if you've incurred some like major losses, that at least you like the work of art that you've
right,
collected, right? At least there's some inherent value that you can personally derive from it. So yeah, I think that becomes really important. But having said that, I mean, it's not necessary at all. There are collectors who just kind of see this as a financial investment, and also especially outside of India, where um, they see this as a tax haven also, right? Like where you can kind of donate works, like charities get written have tax write off, so you can donate artworks in that sense to museums, etc. And kind of it, there is an entire way of using this as saving taxes, etc. So that's
right,
also there.
right.
Yeah,
Very interesting,
that's a
very
merge.
interesting. Getting into the minds, and I often wonder. You talked about how every creator, there's an individual thought process behind why they buy art and why they buy AI art. But then also, if I try to compare it with any other form of creative expression, for example, think about music, right? Of course, individual tastes exist, right? But then there's also this collective hallucination which also exists, right? Think about Swifties. Think about people who are crazy about an artist. In no way am I saying, of course, every artist is unique and they have a lot of creativity going in. But there's also this collective, this the feeling of we belong to this cult or this group or this fan base. Do you see similar things happening in art also, especially as an artist goes towards greatness, let's say, right? Of course, we in traditional art we know the great artists. I'm sure in the AI art world also there are a lot of great artists like yourself who are making that mark, making the legacy, right? But do you see that sort of collective love, or the group, the feeling of groupism, the feeling of we all belong to, let's say, Harshit Agrawal School of Art? Do you see that shaping up?
Yeah, that sounds like a nice phrase, no? Harshit Agrawal School of Art. I should really dig into that. But yeah, there is a sense of collective buying, collective consumption in the art world also. And like we were discussing, there are a few factors that kind of make an artist be noticed by the larger population, which is if they've done let's say they've sorry they've done like a show of their own, which is like a solo show, or if they've been auctioned in some major auction houses, or if they've been collected by institutions, which is museums and or cultural ministries and so on. So there are a few things which really make an artist start getting noticed, and once that happens, there is that sort of collector group starts to really, as a collective, almost starts to respond to that artist, and everyone kind of wants a piece of the pie. Um, that kind of, I think, cult following in a certain way, which you're referring to, of an artist, doesn't generally happen primarily because of the quantity of artworks being limited in a certain sense, right? Like the artworks derive value by the limited number of availability of each work. So at max, like even in digital works, like ideally you could make as many copies of a digital work as you want. So for an AI artwork, I could have a million editions of it, but the value of the artwork comes from saying that this is an edition of 3 or 5 or 7 at max. And because there is that limited sense, you would only have 3 collectors of a certain artwork, and in a lifetime an artist would produce 100, 200 works. So the quantity of the kind of work that they're putting out, which can actually be collected. So what I'm saying, if it's 100 works and each of them is 3 editions, you'd at max have 300 collectors who can actually own a Harshit Agrawal like an artwork coming from Harshit Agrawal School of Art, right? So if that happens, that kind of cult following in terms of appreciating an artist could happen, but that kind of ownership in a collective sense by default is kind of limited because of the limited number of artworks. Like for music, songs, etc., right? Like you don't have a cap on the like with the way that the industry is evolved, the music industry is evolved. You have like you can own a song like you, on Apple Music or whatever for a couple of dollars, etc. Right? So the idea there is sort of that collective ownership of music, or you have the performance element there, so you can kind of go and attend like a concert, etc., and you kind of show your sense of uh, like appreciation or that sense of monetary investment by investing in that experience. For an artwork, that becomes really different because, yeah, of the limited numbers that are out there. But also, like, what was interesting is during the like NFT cycle that we all saw around COVID times. I mean, NFTs are still a thing, and we can speak of that a little bit more. But during the peak sort of NFT movement, you did have artists experimenting with the idea that we're going to keep this artwork as kind of an open edition and sell it for like mimic the music industry model and say that each artwork, like if it's a visual image or if it's a like whatever animation or something, that we're going to sell this for $1 a piece and we just let everyone have a
Piece
piece
of the
of this
pie.
artwork.
Mm, yeah.
Yeah, and some artists experimented with that, but that is generally not been the traditional sense of how artworks are collected. And this sort of mass like ownership didn't really fly in the art world from what I perceived, at least during the NFT phase. And digitally, that was a possibility, right? Like digitally, what the artists were trying to do is basically say that everyone will get a blockchain contract saying that they own that token, and we'll make like as many copies of that token as needed. So digitally it's all valid, like, and technically like you have the ownership because you have that tamper proof blockchain like certificate that's available on the blockchain, right? So as a medium, like NFTs allowed for that kind of thing to happen very seamlessly without like a centralized Apple Music kind of entity being needed or a Spotify kind of entity being needed. This could all happen decentralized through the blockchain. But yeah, I think that sort of notion of the art world is that you have a very few or primarily one or three kind of set of artworks, and that's it. Like that's what brings value to the art that you're making. But at the same time, yeah, like I think within that collector set that has the ability to purchase or that interest in purchasing that sort of, because it's a rare piece, you can obviously have it for like 20 lakhs, 50 lakhs, a crore or whatever, right? But within that collector set, yeah, you can kind of start building that collective uh, like appreciation from all the collectors out there.
Good.
But at a mass value, that's not something that the art world
So
has
it's
seen.
more of a so the value is in the exclusivity rather than sort of like creating a mass appeal. Also, I
Yeah,
would think there's also an angle of Maslow's here, right? If you think about it, the higher somebody goes on Maslow's, that's when they start appreciating forms of art such as these, right? If you first start off with just your usual food, shelter, and then you move on to basic level of entertainment, which typically needs multimedia visuals, and then you go one level higher where for you it's not just pure entertainment but it's art and you are thinking, it makes you think, right? So maybe that's
yeah,
also got some sort of a role to play, right?
yeah,
Maybe not as economic Maslow's, of course economic Maslow's plays a big role, that's what Maslow's is, but also some sort
yeah,
of a psychological Maslow's, if I may put it that way, right? You have to reach a level of thinking where you look at a piece of art and it invokes something new. So which is why maybe the way art sells is exclusivity, right? Even today, even for the greatest artists we know, for example, in India, MF Hussain, yes, everybody knows MF Hussain. Maybe they can see an MF Hussain and tell you it's an MF Hussain. But the collectors are still an exclusive community of people, right? The ones who know they want to spend that much money to, either invest in that art or also to just be able to understand and think about what that art showcases, right? So I think that also has an angle. Harshit, super exciting set of things. I didn't realize time has flown. I have one last question, with which I would want to end the podcast. It is about, how do you see now talking about implementation of, not just AI art, but AI in creativity, right? It's already happening, right? In marketing, for example, as a marketer, I see that I ensure that my team leverages AI as much as possible. I'm not saying AI replaces anybody, but to sort of boost creativity, to sort of bring in an element of additional creativity, right? How do you see the role of designers or marketeers or creative teams change
Yeah.
with AI becoming more and more mainstream, right? So do you see them as partnering with AI? Do you see them as using AI just as a tool, or will they become AI whisperers? Where uh, they guide the machine to give the output, while of course the creativity comes from the machine. I'm guessing it's not the third from what we have discussed till now, but I would love to hear your point of view as, as a creator, as somebody who is in the, in that overlap of being an engineer and, having graduated from MIT Media Labs. You understand both side of things, right? So what is your POV? We would love to hear that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I mean, first of all, I think it's really important that every field kind of embraces the value that AI provides and being conscious of not keeping it at a pedestal also simultaneously. So, like, really appreciating it for what it is and not like beyond that to some extent. And I think, in terms of like, the way the kind of relation between AI and human in any of these professions might happen is a lot about like augmenting the human capabilities or human intellect. So the quicker I think we figure out collectively like how to tap into this immense power that AI provides, the easier it is for us to like make best use of it. And in terms of I would say for non-artistic fields, I think the idea of the AI sometimes being more creative in terms of solutioning is very much a possibility. And even in the AI like art field, as we were discussing, like the artist leaves that space for the AI to guide the artist in a certain direction, right? I think for even for fields like design, marketing, etc., I think that plays a huge role, that the artists or like the designers, marketeers start embracing the fact that the AI can like kind of surprise you in positive ways and kind of steer you in certain directions. And it becomes important to use that kind of super tool to its most advantages, because a lot of times, at least what I've seen, is there is sort of that dismissal also, that I mean we understand as humans like the space better, or like we have this sort of capability of judging things from intuition better, etc. Which may be true, which may not be true, but at least not like dismiss what the AI can bring to the table in its current form and in its sort of future forms, right? So I think there will be people who will sort of, at least in the immediate sense, kind of be left behind, just kind of being skeptics and not really embracing this. And in a lot of ways, I think becomes really important as professionals and also just as uh, kind of people living their everyday lives, right? To really start embracing and build more of a personal relation with AI than uh, treat it as this sort of entity that you have nothing to do with, or you don't see as something that really plays a part in your everyday lives. Because I think that once that realization happens, then that I think conscious awareness of what actually is happening and how to kind of tame it in a certain sense for your own advantages really starts to happen. So I think that acknowledgement is the first step. But in all, by all means, I think there are like some people kind of quote this as a statement that right, like when cars first came about, like the idea of getting from point A to point B is what cars solved much more efficiently. So that was the task at hand. And of course, like people who didn't use cars kind of got left behind in the whole journey, right? And people who liked like horse riding, for example, not as a way of getting from like not as a practical thing that horses should be used for getting from point A to point B, but just as something that they like doing at a personal level. They continued kind of having kind of they continued becoming jockeys or whatever, right? But that didn't mean that the idea of using cars to get from point A to point B was shunned, right? So if you could do that, you will do that. Like basically to say that if AI can do something, it will do something. You may not do take it up immediately, but like other people will, and you'll kind of be left behind in that sense. So even in terms of like the legalities of all of this as they're getting figured out, like I don't see it as being regulated to the extent of being reduced in its capabilities. I mean, the regulations might happen in a certain way, but if there is a capability that exists, like people will find ways to make sure that it gets used. So might as well get on the bandwagon and like start really like becoming intimate with it in a certain way. Yeah.
That's a great way to put it. I think we have to start embracing it, understand the nuances, is what you're saying. It's not a zero and one. It's not that AI is here to, take away jobs, and it will take away some jobs in the long run, but then people have to upskill, like you said, right?
Yeah,
People who
and if
earlier
it
were
does take away
maybe
a job, then
ferrying
you should
people,
rethink.
right, ferrying people around now, let's say in horse carriages, they had to learn how to drive so that they could become drivers, and maybe their
Exactly.
quality of life also improved as technology came in. So great
Exactly.
points, Harshit. Had a wonderful, wonderful time talking to you. So much to learn. I
Likewise.
mean, seriously, it is fascinating, and your journey has also been very fascinating. I'm always rooting for you, and rooting for the Harshit Agrawal, art fan club to really grow, right? The School of Art to really, really grow. Thank you so much. Thanks for your time. And with this, we'll end the podcast.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Aditi. Yeah.